In this video you will learn how to attack and destroy the enemy castling when black attacks with bishop g4. The game started with d4. Black responded with knight f6, developing his king's knight and taking control of the e4 square, to prevent the opponent from occupying the center with his pawns. Knight f3. Developing the king's knight towards its natural square, reinforcing the defense of the d4 pawn and increasing control over the central squares. g6. Black wants to play the king's Indian defense. His idea is to develop the king's bishop through the fianchetto, where it will be very well placed, since it will occupy the large diagonal of dark squares and put pressure on the center. Knight c3. Developing the queen's knight towards its natural square and taking control over the e4 square. White is now prepared to occupy the center with e4. Black responded with bishop g7. Continuing with its development scheme, with the idea of using the king's Indian defense. His plan is to allow white to occupy the center with his pawns, in order to have a clear attack objective and try to destroy it in the future. e4. Occupying the center with his pawns and threatening to advance with e5, which would give white an advantage. Black responded with d6. Taking control over the e5 square, to prevent the white pawn from advancing further, and at the same time allowing the development of the queen's bishop. Bishop to e3. Developing the queen's bishop to a good square, from where it reinforces the defense of the d4 pawn and at the same time increases control over the c5 square. This will make it difficult for black to break with c5. Black castled. Queen d2. Mobilizing the queen and preparing to invade with the bishop on the h6 square. White's plan is to castle on the queen side and launch a strong attack against the king side. Bishop g4. Developing the queen's bishop and attacking the f3 knight, with the idea of changing some pieces and simplifying the position. Knight g5. Avoiding changes of pieces and bringing the horse closer to the opposite castling. White can then continue with h3 or f3 to expel the opposing bishop and force it to retreat. If black now plays h6, to try to expel the opposing knight, white can respond with h3, counterattacking against the black bishop. If black continues for example with bishop d7, removing the bishop to a safe square. White simply responds with knight f3, threatening e5 and bishop takes on h6 and white has the advantage. And, if after the move h3, black plays h takes g5. White can then respond with h takes g4. And the h column is left open for attack. The g5 pawn is threatened and white has the advantage. For example, after knight takes g4. Bishop takes g5. Knight c6, attacking the d4 pawn. f3. Threatening to capture the black knight and forcing it to retreat. Knight f6. Bishop h6, with the idea of eliminating the black bishop of the fianchetto, which is the best defender of the enemy castling. White has a decisive attack. The immediate threat is bishop takes h6, followed by queen's check h6, which would lead to mate. White is winning. In the game, after the knight g5, black played a6, with the idea of preparing the attack on the queen side and trying to obtain counterplay. White responded f3, connecting his pawns and attacking the enemy bishop, which is forced to retreat. Bishop c8. Black's attack has been unsuccessful and his bishop has to retreat. h4. Launching the pawns to attack with the idea of advancing with h5 and opening the h-file for the attack. The 150 attack is a system that is very easy to play and offers white very good attacking possibilities. So far, white has made very simple and natural moves and already has an advantage, since he is ahead in the development, dominates the central squares and has the possibility of organizing a strong attack against the enemy castling. If black now plays h6, with the idea of expelling the opponent's knight, white can ignore the threat on his knight and castle on the queenside to continue his attack. After h takes g5. H takes g5. The h-file has opened and the black knight is threatened. After knight f to d7. White can continue with f4, with the idea of continuing with queen f2 to h4. And the black king will not resist many more moves. After h4, black can try knight to c6 or knight to d7. But white continues with h5 and has a very strong attack. For example, after knight takes h5. g4. Knight g3. Rook takes h7 and white is winning. After the move h4, black can try h5, with the idea of preventing the white pawn from advancing further. White can castle on the queenside and his plan is to continue with g4 followed by h5, even sacrificing 2 pawns, to break on the kingside and open lines to attack against the enemy king. In another video we will see a game with this idea. After h4, black can try b5, in order to accelerate his attack on the queenside. But white responds with h5, continuing his kingside attack, which arrives much earlier and is more dangerous than the opponent's attack. After knight takes h5. White continues with g4. And now, knight g3 is not possible because after queen h2, white threatens to checkmate on h7 and the black knight is lost. And after knight f6. White can continue with knight takes h7 and wins. For example, after knight takes h7. Queen h2, threatening to capture the knight giving checkmate. Knight f6. Bishop h6, threatening to capture on g7, which would lead to checkmate. Knight h5, desperately trying to block the h-file, to prevent mating threats. G takes h5. Bishop takes h6. H takes g6 and white is going to recover the piece and has a decisive attack. In the game, after h4, black played e6. White played h5, continuing his attack. It is not possible to capture the pawn because after g takes h5 black's castling is very weak and white will be able to attack very easily. For example, he can continue to castle on the queenside, then break on the kingside with g4 and the black king will not be able to prevent the checkmate. And, if after h5, black captures the pawn with the knight, then g4 follows and the h-file is left open and the attack is decisive. For example, knight f6. Knight takes h7. Knight takes h7. Queen h2. Knight f6. e5 and white is winning. And if after g4, black plays knight g3. White responds with queen h2, threatening checkmate and attacking the knight. After h6. Queen takes g3. H takes g5. White castles long and can continue with f4, e5, etc. and has a winning attack. In the game, after h5, black played h6, attacking the white knight, with the idea of forcing it to retreat. Now the strongest continuation was knight takes f7. For example, after king takes f7. White follows with h takes g6, followed by bishop takes h6 and the black king will not resist many more moves. For example, king e8. Bishop takes h6. Bishop takes h6. Queen takes h6. Queen e7. e5. D takes e5. D takes e5. Knight d5. g7. Rook g8. Queen h8. Queen takes g7. Queen takes g7. Rook takes g7. Rook h8 check. King d7. Knight takes d5. E takes d5. e6 check. King takes e6. Rook takes c8. And white wins. In the game, after h6, white played knight h3, to defend the knight. If black now plays knight takes h5. White responds with knight e2, taking control over the g3 square and preparing the long castling, following by g4, and has a very strong attack. In the game, after knight h3, black played g5, with the idea of keeping the game close and trying to defend his king. But white responded by knight takes g5, sacrificing the knight to completely destroy the opponent's king's defenses. After h takes g5. White played h6, attacking the enemy bishop. After bishop h8. White played bishop takes g5 and is threatening e5, to recover the piece. Queen d7, to get out of the pin and avoid the opponent's threat. Queen f4, incorporating the queen into the attack on the king side and threatening to capture on f6. Knight h7, to defend the knight. Queen g3, threatening a dangerous discovered check, which would lead to checkmate. It is not possible to continue with knight takes g5, because after h7 check. King g7. Queen takes g5 is checkmate. After the queen moved g3, black played f5, trying to escape with the king. The game continued bishop f6 check. King f7. Bishop takes h8 and black resigned. In summary, the 150 attack is a very powerful development scheme that allows white to organize a strong attack against the opposing castling, when the enemy bishop has been developed through the fianchetto. In the following video we will see another very illustrative master game in which we will see how to open lines on the king side to attack.